The Tom Woods Show, episode 1612.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, I have the best, nicest, smartest, brightest group of like-minded, friendly folks you can possibly imagine, where we learn from each other, we get outraged with each other, we rejoice with each other. It's a wonderful community of folks, and you, as a loyal listener of The Tom Woods Show, belong inside it. It's called The Tom Woods Show Elite, and you can get in there via supportinglisteners.com. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. I want to say a few things about that Democratic debate last night between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. I mean, I can't imagine anything being less relevant to what the world needs to hear about right now, but it is revealing on a number of levels, and I do have a 5-day-a-week podcast, and it does seem like a natural topic to cover. So I want to run through a few of the themes here, and I have at least one reading assignment for you that I think you'll find very interesting. I'll get to that in a minute. Of course, you know that they, for various reasons and using various methods, excluded Tulsi Gabbard from the debate, even though she's still in the running and qualified to be in the debate under the previous criteria. But how about that? Those were changed. So it was just Bernie and Joe with no crowd. And again, virtually everybody listening to this probably knows that. And that's because of the coronavirus fears. And the two of them very ostentatiously did not shake hands, and so on and on. So that issue takes up a great deal of the debate. There are other topics too, but I want to start there. I think, first of all, it's legit from at least Bernie's point of view to say that if the Federal Reserve can put $1.5 trillion into the banking system, then we can protect the wages of every worker in America. I mean, it seems like when the Fed does that kind of thing, it's opening itself up to that sort of response from progressives. And likewise, progressives, I don't agree with them, but certainly their analysis is not wrong when they say we never seem to have any trouble finding money for war. That always comes through. We never stop and say, well, we'd like to go uninstall that dictator we installed 10 years ago, but we just haven't got the money to do it. That never happens. Never happens. And yet with the suffering of our own people, there's hand-wringing and, well, we can't do this or we can't do that. That's the progressive point of view. And at least with regard to the seeming urgency of war and the confidence that the money will come from somewhere, they're not wrong. And so when you act like that, you're going to get progressives giving you this kind of response. So that's one of the things Bernie said early on in the debate. So then Joe Biden, who, by the way, if I were to talk about who did well in this, well, they both did creditably well. Biden seemed competent, I think more than he has in other debates. I thought he would have trouble going one-on-one with Sanders, frankly, more trouble than he did. But he did perfectly well. I mean, I don't agree with him, but I'm talking about in terms of how did he appear to the general public. He was fine. I mean, no major gaffes or anything, certainly. And then Bernie, I would say Bernie scored some points by digging up some of the votes that Biden has had in the past when Biden was a more conservative Democrat. And he did dig some of those up, some to good effect, others that maybe not so much. So Biden was a bit on the defensive. But the thing is that some of these issues, like the Hyde Amendment, are complex enough that I think most people thought this is a wash. Who really knows what the truth about this is? Because you voted for the Hyde Amendment, which has to do with advising about abortion using federal funds. And Biden said, well, yeah, basically almost everybody in the Senate at one time or another has voted for the Hyde Amendment because it's been attached to so many bills, you almost can't avoid it. So somebody walks away probably wondering, well, maybe that's a good point. I don't really know what the truth about this is, so it winds up really not sticking. So that kind of thing happened a bit. So anyway, Joe Biden was asked, did bureaucratic red tape hamper the response to the coronavirus in any way? Because Trump has been saying that he inherited so many rules and regulations and red tape that he can't take responsibility for the situation with the virus testing. And so Biden was asked flat out, did bureaucratic red tape hamper this response in any way? And Biden's answer was flat out no. No was the answer. So here's your reading assignment. I'm going to link to it at tomwoods.com/1612. It's an article in, of all places, the New York Times, that lays out precisely what happened in terms of bureaucratic red tape that caused so many delays and snafus. It's like I wrote the article, honestly. You won't believe what you're reading. And your progressive friends somehow, even though it's in the New York Times, their eyes glided over this article, or people haven't shown it to them. I don't know how to account for this. They have no idea about any of this. And it changes the whole way you think about the situation. So to make a long story short, and I'm just going to give you the tip of the iceberg because you really need to read the whole article. The story begins, some of you may know this part of the story, that Helen Chu in Seattle, Dr. Chu was a infectious disease expert. And she had in her area in late January the first confirmed American coronavirus case. So you got to ask questions. Where's this person been? Has he infected anybody else? So is the virus now already sitting there in American communities without anybody's knowledge? So she had a way that she could use to monitor the region. She'd been part of a research project into the flu. And so she'd already been part of a project that was gathering nasal swabs from people in the Puget Sound region who had been exhibiting flu-like symptoms. And so she was going to repurpose these tests for monitoring the coronavirus. But in order to do that, she has to get state and federal officials' support. But at practically every turn, they're rejecting her plan. And weeks are going by. Critical time is passing. So by February 25th, she just decided we just can't wait any longer. And they just started performing the tests for the virus without government approval. And so what they found, what they came back with was a positive test from a teenager who had not recently traveled anywhere. So that means the virus had established itself on American soil without anybody realizing it. So the virus, it turns out by that time, had already contributed to 2 deaths and killed a whole bunch more in the Seattle region in the days that followed. All right, well, so why were federal and state officials not letting them repurpose this test? Well, the answer was they said they didn't have the explicit permission of the research subjects themselves, and also the labs in question were not certified for clinical work. So Dr. Chu acknowledged the ethical questions involved here, but said that maybe given that it's an emergency, we might have a little bit more flexibility. Well, then she was told by state regulators to stop testing altogether. And here's how the New York Times sums it up. And Biden was asked flat out, did red tape cause a problem? His answer was no. Here's the New York Times. The Seattle flu study illustrates how existing regulations and red tape, sometimes designed to protect privacy and health, have impeded the rapid rollout of testing nationally, while other countries ramped up much earlier and faster. Well, that's just it. I mean, they just say it based on their examination of what actually happened. So Biden is in la la land or something. But it really, really gets worse when you read, like, for example, the CDC was supposed to develop a diagnostic test and then criteria for deciding which individuals should be tested. But their criteria were so strict that the sick man in the Seattle area who had actually gone to Wuhan did not meet the criteria. So the criteria are a little bit maybe unreasonable. So you look at the story and it's, February 10th, you've got one of the funders of the Seattle flu study writing to officials saying, hoping there is a solution here. And 6 days later, getting a response from the CDC saying, well, you'd have to talk to the FDA. The FDA can't approve it because the lab in question was not certified as a clinical lab under the existing regulations. And to get it so certified would take months. So it was just, again, you got to read the whole thing. Just insanity and just dumb. There are always cases when some bureaucrat somewhere will take some existing rule and apply it to the point of absurdity. And that's when it finally gets public attention. Well, so it got a little bit of public attention because of this New York Times article, I'm happy to acknowledge. Anyway, honestly, I could make the whole episode about just this. But let's get back to Bernie and Biden here. Bernie repeated something that I saw him say on Twitter not long ago, where he said, we have to make clear to the pharmaceutical companies that if any drug is released that can help us against the coronavirus, it will be sold at cost. This is not a time for profiteering. So go ahead and engage in a process that opens you up to all kinds of lawsuits, because if your drug goes wrong, and that costs millions, tens of millions, or even more than that in associated costs, do that, and the result will be you can break even. We'll let you break even. So, and on Twitter, I said, well, this ought to give a shot in the arm to innovation. So Bernie stuck by that you're not going to make $1 off this. I don't know. My thinking is, however you feel about the pharmaceutical industry, now's not the time for the hectoring lecture about you're not going to make $1 off this. I'd like them to make $1. I'd be quite happy if they made $1 off this. So then he says, if you're a multimillionaire, you're going to get through this crisis. You're going to get everything you need. You're not worried about this and that. But it seems to me that everybody is getting hit. The rich and the poor. I mean, yeah, I know Bernie's worried about billionaires. How many of them are there? Basically none. So there's really no need to worry about them. But a typical business owner who may be a millionaire is faced with absolutely catastrophic outcomes here, because a lot of businesses are either being forced to shut down or in one way or another feeling compelled to shut down for an indefinite period of time. Supply chains are disrupted. Consumers are spooked. People are afraid of losing their jobs, so that nobody wants to go to your establishment. Restaurants are in a hopeless position. The airline industry, the hospitality industry, major losses are in the offing. And instead of acknowledging that there's a really, really seriously shared sacrifice going on here, it's still the same old, the rich people are going to be fine. Are you kidding me? The fortunes of these stocks of major American companies are in the tank at this point. So he can't even say we're all in this together just this one time. Can't do that. One of the issues where Bernie hit Biden a bit had to do with Social Security, because he claims that Biden has been openly trying to cut Social Security for a very long time, so throughout his career. And he says to Biden, did you not say on the Senate floor that you wanted to cut Social Security? And Biden says, no, I didn't do that. And Bernie is incredulous and says, now, come on now. You've been on the Senate floor and you've talked about Social Security. You're not going to admit that you were advocating cuts. And he says, I am not admitting any such thing because I didn't do that. And during the debate, you've got Bernie supporters like David Sirota, who's a horrible person. David Sirota is the guy who says that back in 2013, he said Venezuela was a great example of socialism, and the reason nobody in the United States wants to acknowledge it is that they don't want word getting out about how great socialism is. Now, notice, Sirota did not say what they're all saying now. Oh, Venezuela is not real socialism. When he thought it was working, you darn well better believe it was real socialism. That's what we heard from him, and he's a top-ranking Bernie campaign guy now. He did not say Venezuela is not real socialism. They only say that after it fails. They never, ever say it at the time. So he's a terrible person. But he was tweeting out, look, here's the video. Here's the video of Joe Biden saying he wants to cut Social Security. So I thought, I'm going to take a page out of Bob Murphy here. Because as you know, on our Contra Krugman podcast, Bob says that half the time when you click through on Krugman's columns, you click one of the links, it says the opposite of what he claims it says. It's a truly bizarre thing. So I thought, let me watch this video. At no time does Biden mention cutting Social Security. And it's like some of the things I've gone through with the loser brigade, the crazy people on Twitter who don't like me. I mean, I don't know where they're getting some of the stuff they accuse me of. I don't know where it comes from. And they'll say, well, look at this one sentence. And I'll say, first of all, to judge a person on the basis of one sentence is a little bit deranged in the first place, but the sentence obviously doesn't mean that, which is why that sentence has sat there uncommented on for 10 years, because it obviously doesn't mean that. So I thought maybe this is happening to Biden too. So sure enough, what Biden said on there involved freezing government spending. He said, we have to freeze everything. I favor freezing everything for the time being. Okay, well, a freeze is not actually a cut, turns out. That's really not a cut. And people, what they tried to say was, well, the freeze won't allow gradual introductions of cost of living adjustments, which then is implicitly a cut. Well, maybe. That is really stretching the English language. Not to mention, how long was the freeze really going to go on? I mean, how long? Biden, like anybody else, knows there's no freeze of government spending that lasts any length of time. You're going to get those cost of living adjustments, obviously. So I thought, that's what they've got. And they honestly thought this was a gotcha. And there he is on the floor saying, we have to freeze everything. Everybody has to sacrifice. We have to freeze everything. That was what he said. So, but the problem then becomes, Bernie says one thing about it, Biden says another. Most people are not going to go to YouTube to adjudicate this. They have no idea what the heck is going on. So I think, therefore, it maybe leaves a little bit of suspicion in people's minds about Biden, but they figure, well, I don't know, I can't figure out which one of these is right. And not to mention, I mean, really, does anybody, especially the Biden of 2020, does anybody actually think there are going to be Social Security cuts under this guy? I mean, come on. You'd have to be completely tone deaf to think that. All right, let me take a quick pause, tell you about something very, very important, and it involves that phenomenon that sometimes people have called adulting. One part of adulting, a major, major part, involves coping with the uncertainty of the future. As Mises taught us, the future is uncertain, and if there's one thing human beings are not great at, it's predicting the future. There are no crystal balls or fortune cookies or tea leaves that could have predicted the world we're living in right now. But unpredictability also keeps life interesting. So the trick is to enjoy the ride without worrying about what's around the corner. And one way to worry less and to do some serious adulting is to get the right life insurance. And that's where Policy Genius can help. Policy Genius makes finding the right life insurance a breeze. I've used it, and it is completely idiot-proof. In minutes, you can compare quotes from the top insurers and find your best price. You could save $1,500 or more a year by using Policy Genius to compare life insurance policies. Once you apply, the Policy Genius team handles all the paperwork and red tape for free. And it's not just life insurance that Policy Genius makes easy. They can also help you find the right home and auto insurance and even disability insurance. So if you haven't found a play-by-play breakdown of your future inside a crystal ball or a cookie, that's okay. Be prepared for anything with life insurance. In just a few minutes, you can find your best price and apply at PolicyGenius.com. Policy Genius will always get the future wrong. Better get life insurance right. All right, let's get back to discussion of this debate. Bernie raises the gender pay gap again, and I've got a chapter on that in Bernie Sanders is Wrong. Now, that ebook has been out since 2016, or maybe 2015, as a matter of fact. And with Bernie apparently not going to win the Democratic nomination because the establishment Democrats rallied to Biden in a very unlikely last-minute swarm, the value of that book, perceived value, is going to decrease very quickly, even though the information in there is evergreen, because if it's not Bernie, it's going to be somebody else who believes those things. But the ebook, which is free, is called Bernie Sanders is Wrong. It's a real live book. It's like 150 pages. There's real information in there. And I've got a chapter in there on the gender pay gap, and I've done episodes, at least one, on the gender pay gap. So I'm going to write that down. I'll put that on the show notes page. I feel like I've talked about it so much, I just can't bring myself to do it again. There is no gender pay gap when you're comparing apples to apples. As I think I've mentioned before, I mean, even leaving out the fact that women, because they bear children, have different expectations and requirements for jobs, which limits the types of jobs they apply for in the first place, that alone helps to account for a good chunk of the gap. Because if you look at single, never married women against single, never married men, there's basically no gap. So, well, why would there suddenly be a gap when women are of childbearing age and they're married? Well, that partly that has a good chunk to do with it. But then also, if you look at number of hours worked, they say we're comparing full-time workers with full-time workers, but see, there's the problem. What constitutes a full-time worker? For the sake of these statistics, it's 35 hours or more per week. All right, well, it turns out that I don't know this off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact numbers, but a much, much more substantial percentage of women work between 35 and 40 per week, and a much more substantial percentage of men work 45 plus per week. So the men are actually working more hours than the women, and yet they're comparing their salaries like they're all full-time workers, so what's the problem? Well, but that is a problem. They're not working, the women aren't working as many hours. As it turns out, you don't earn as much when you don't work as many hours. So when you factor in, so they're saying for a long time it was, there was a 41-cent gap, then it was 30, and now it's this and that. All right, well, whatever they're claiming the gap is now, it's cut down to 12 cents on the dollar when you simply factor in how much work each is doing, how many hours the women are working, how many hours men are working. When you factor that in, the so-called gender pay gap is reduced to 12 cents on the dollar. And then those other 12 cents have to do with lifestyle differences and whatever. So we've talked about this before. And as I've said, when the White House chief of staff was asked about this, he had an interesting answer under Obama, because it turns out that the Obama White House had a 12-cent on the dollar gender pay gap. How about that? And when they were confronted with that, they answered, well, men and women do different things in the White House. Yeah, I know. Well, that's what the private sector has been trying to tell you, and yet you haven't let them get away with that. There's a magical exemption when it comes to the state. All right, then there was a discussion in the debate, naturally, about climate change. You have to expect that. There's going to be a debate on climate change. So for that, because I've talked a lot about climate change, let me recommend another ebook. I have an ebook called AOC is Wrong. This one's even better than the Bernie one, in my opinion. Much more biting. And in this one, because I think some of the tone of the Bernie one is more restrained. This one is just, okay, look, we tried being restrained. Now we just are going full on here. There's some really good material on climate change, and in particular, a section with Patrick Moore, formerly of Greenpeace, where he lays out what he thinks is a reasonable response to the situation. So I refer you there. Bernie was asked about whether he would support Joe Biden. Now, he's already said he would if Biden gets the nomination. He's already said he would, even though he thinks Biden represents everything wrong with the political establishment. He's going to support him. But what's significant here is the way he tries to argue why he thinks Joe's going to have a difficult time. He says, I have a lot of enthusiasm in my campaign. And if we're going to beat Donald Trump, we need to bring out a very, very big voter turnout. And he says, look, I have a lot of young people, and, they're not voting in the kinds of numbers they should be, but, I can bring them in. And Latinos are not voting in the kinds of numbers they should be. I can bring them in. But the problem is, of course, even when it's Bernie running, the young people don't vote in the numbers that they should be in his view. That's the thing. He's saying he has big, enthusiastic rallies, but the point is that young people don't vote for him either. They like him. I'm sure they'd be happy to see him get elected, but they don't actually vote for him. So he's making what seems to me to be a bit of an empty promise. I'm going to bring all these people, but the people he's specifically talking about are people he openly admits don't really vote in very high percentages. And he thinks, but they'll vote for me. But it doesn't seem like that's happening. And then I think Biden had the perfectly sensible response. I mean, I can't believe those words have just left my mouth. But he said, just get this straight. The energy and excitement taking place so far has been for me. 70% turnout increase in Virginia. They're coming out for me. I didn't even have the money to compete with this man in those states. I virtually had no money. The press kept saying Biden has no money. And they were right. No money. And so why are they doing that? The reason they're doing that is that they understand I know what has to happen. I know what needs to be done. So that's pretty hard. That's a hard thing for Bernie to answer, because I understand his feeling. He's got a lot of enthusiasm. And I think a lot of his people would knock on doors, and, they're more the activist type than the typical Biden voter is. So he can definitely say he has the energy. But does he have the votes? And I think Biden kind of smacked him down on that. So I think that's pretty much, I mean, who needs to hear more than this about a Biden Bernie Sanders debate? So on the show notes page, I'll have some stuff, have the New York Times article you have to read, and I'll have some stuff on the gender pay gap. And on that page, I'll also include a website created by a Tom Woods Show listener. This one is medlinpro.com, because it's a fellow named Scott Medlin who started it. Medlinpro.com, MEDLIN pro.com. And it's a site that teaches you a bit about internet marketing and affiliate marketing in particular, and how it is that, I mean, almost anything online's got some kind of affiliate program, like Amazon. If you have a blog and you're talking about a book, you link people to the book on Amazon, and if they buy it, you get, a small commission. Nice thing about Amazon's program is that you not only get a commission on that book, but even if they don't buy that book, you get a commission on anything they buy in that Amazon session. So you like having that link there because people click on it and maybe they don't buy that thing, but they start shopping. You get on Amazon, you find yourself, if you're like me, you start shopping. And so you would earn a commission on anything they buy within a 24-hour period from the time they click that link. So Amazon's not a place you're going to get really, really high commissions, because these are physical products and they're operating on extremely razor-thin profit margins. But there are other types of products where you can earn much, much higher commissions, precisely because they are not associated with the costs of physical goods. And that would be like, let's say, video courses that are deliverable online, or indeed ebooks, things like that, where there is no physical cost. There's no cost to creating a million of them, because it's immaterial. So you can just send out however many of them without incurring any additional costs. And so the creators of those things can afford much higher commissions. They can pay you 50% sometimes 75%, sometimes even more. And the way I think of affiliate marketing is, it's like, the analogy is not quite right, but the principle of it is the same. Those extreme couponers, and for a week they research the grocery store circulars and they look at double coupons and all that, and then they show up with a big, big pile of coupons to the store. And when they get to the register, they have like 2 or 3 carts worth of food, and they wind up paying 12 cents or nothing at all. And it's amazing, but it takes them all week, and you have to really know it like a science. Well, most people use coupons, like you and I do. You find one, it's for $1 off, you use it, that's the end of it. You don't devote your life to coming up with a system for it. You know that if you did, you'd do even better, but you don't have the time or the inclination to do that. So you and I just casually use coupons. Well, same thing can go with affiliate marketing. I mean, there are some people who, they tell their friend, hey, you should sign up for this homeschool program. Your family will really like it. And then they earn a commission. And then that's it. They're not expecting to make a living doing this, the same way you and I just use a $1 coupon. But just as with extreme couponing, there is a science to affiliate marketing too. So if you really, really throw yourself into it, you can make that your living. The same way some people throw themselves into extreme couponing. There is a science to this as much as there is to that. And so medlinpro.com would be a place where you can start learning what that science is. So I'll link to that at tomwoods.com/1612, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.